Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name's Beth Hartley. I'm an alcoholic. And thanks to the grace of God and the steps and fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous and sponsorship, I've been sober since June 26, 1988. And so I celebrated 25 years last month, and that just, I didn't think that was anything like possible for an alcoholic like me. For a long time, I really had no interest in not drinking. So other than, you know, the morning after, I'll never do that again. And then, and when I did try to periodically just kind of chill out for a while, 10 days was about all I'd make. And by then, you know, I always say that 10 days was a long time for me to not drink, but if you were my friend, 10 days was a really long time for you while I was not drinking. And I was a little edgy. And so by 10 days, people would be saying, oh, Beth, you could probably just have a beer. It'll be all right. So, but it's really good to be here. I've actually been to Gonzales before. I was here in 2004, and I was actually speaking on my 12-year wedding anniversary that day. So I had the whole crowd say hi to Chuck because he was not with me. And so this year I just brought him with me. And you'll actually, hi, Chuck.
What's up, Chuck?
And you'll actually get to hear his story tomorrow morning. So because they shuffled the program a bit. So I'm really happy he's here because we just celebrated 21 years of marriage now, 9 years later, and we still like each other. So he's my favorite guy to hang out with. And but it's good to be here. I love Louisiana. I love the food here. I love the accents here. I have a mild accent, but it's that Southern Ohio hick twangy accent. People go, where are you from? And are you from the South? And I was like, well, Southern Ohio, you know. I was actually born in California, but I grew up in Ohio, and that was my first resentment. I didn't want to be from Ohio. I was pissed off about it by the time I was 6 years old. I knew there were places that stayed warm all year. I knew there were places with oceans and Gulf and everything, and I clearly remember the first day of school in first grade looking at a big, you know, those big wall-sized maps of the United States they would have in the classrooms and seeing California and the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf and Texas and Florida and then looking at Ohio and thinking to myself that you could look at a map and tell that nothing's happening in Ohio. And I mean, where does that come from at age 6, you know? And what I know now is I was already restless, irritable, and discontent at 6 years old. At 6 years old, I already thought if I lived somewhere else, I could be happy. If I had a brother or sister, because I was an only child, you know, if I had a brother or sister, if we lived in a bigger house, if my mom didn't work, I was already looking to everything outside to fix what already was a rapidly exploding internal problem. And I, you know, because the truth is, I grew up in Oxford, Ohio, where Miami University is. I was running wild as a teenager while Kent was trying to get thrown out of college there. And, you know, it was a good place to grow up. It was a safe place. I grew up with a love of sports because it was a little town where the students outnumbered the townies 2-1. And so I was attending college sporting events by first grade. And you know, it just, a lot of really good things came out of there. But I was already restless, irritable, and discontent, and I needed to be somewhere else, doing something else with somebody else all the time. I never was happy where I was. It was always, you know, if I came earlier, if I stayed later, if I was with them, if I wasn't with him, if she was my friend, if you weren't my friend, I can't believe you wore that, you know, because everybody, of course, is going to judge me by your t-shirt, you know. And I grew up knowing about Alcoholics Anonymous. My dad got sober in 1966. I was 7 years old. I'm 54 now, so you don't, have to do that. And so I went to meetings as a kid in Hamilton. There was a Friday night open speaker meeting in Hamilton, Ohio. And my parents couldn't afford a sitter all the time, so I would go with them, and I'd be the kid over in the corner with the coloring book, And I knew that AA was full of old men who drank coffee and smoked and ate donuts, because I'd seen it, I mean, I'd been there. And Jay wasn't kidding last night about the smoke. I mean, it was anonymous back then. You couldn't see across a table. And my dad told me about all the horrors of his drinking and the lost dreams and all of that. And if he said he had fun drinking, I don't remember him talking about it. I just heard the bad. And I got to tell you, when I drank, I had fun. I mean, from the get-go. And I just thought, how tragic for my dad that he had such a hard time with it, Some people just shouldn't drink, and I guess Dad is one of those. And, but I'm not one of those people who crossed the threshold of Alcoholics Anonymous and saw the light and knew I was home and wanted what you have and lived happily ever after and won the lottery and all that. When I did start to come to AA, I didn't want to be here. I knew it was lame. Every now and then I'd be home visiting my dad, and he'd invite me to a meeting. I thought, well, how nice, he wants me to meet his friends. Never, I'm sure he was going, please, God, let her hear something, But when they would introduce themselves, they'd go around the room, and I'd say, my name's Beth, I'm with him. Because I am not going to say the A word in the same sentence with my name. Because if you grow up with AA in the house, I mean, I've heard people speak who said they sat in the bar and said, oh, I'm alcoholic, who cares? And that's not a luxury that you have with a sober parent, because I intuitively knew, with a keen alcoholic mind, I intuitively knew that if I even wondered aloud once if I might maybe possibly be alcoholic, that a big book would drop out of the sky and somebody would hand me a meeting schedule, and the AA police would come take me away to a meeting. So I was not wondering if I was alcoholic. I didn't want to know. And so I passed through a few times. My general AA pattern was jail or treatment. Treatment sounds like a good plan. I would go to treatment. I would come around for, a good week or two when I got out of treatment. I gave it, I tried, and then I'd disappear for another year. But I heard him talking about things like being self-centered. And I'm a test taker. I'm pretty good intellect. And I thought that self-centered meant vain and selfish, and I am neither of those. Just ask, I'll tell you. And, I didn't know that self-centered described my entire life long before I drank. The big book says the bottle's a symptom. And like many other things I read in the big book passing through treatment, I kind of went, yeah, whatever. And I didn't give any thought to what that meant. But, what I know now is self-centered in my life means if I can't win, I'm not playing. And self-centered means you will never see me try something new if there's anyone around who might see me fail. And self-centered means if I walk into a room and two people in the back lean their heads together and laugh, I know they're talking about me, And self-centered means I cannot have a conversation with you without being 3 sentences ahead of you in my head, picking from what you'll say this, and then I'll say this, and then you'll say this. I didn't know that's what self-centered was, that I was unable to make a move without considering all of that. And the big book talks about in the inventory that we found through inventory that the world and its people dominated us. And I read that, and I didn't really get it the first time through, because I was a biker. I mean, I had my own Harley. I drank with, large people that wore black leather and rode motorcycles. And for whatever reason, I was never involved in violent relationships. I never was a fighter. I had a huge fear of getting punched in public and crying because it would hurt. And, but I must have looked like I would fight, so people left me alone. And so when I read that, the world and its people dominated us, I thought they were talking about physical domination. And that wasn't my experience. And what I've come to understand is what dominated me is what you thought about me. The entire time I'm out there waving my "I don't care what you think" flag, I cared desperately what you thought, because who do I have to be so you'll let me in? And who do I have to be so you'll go out with me? Or who do I have to be so you'll marry me? Or who do I have to be so you'll hire me? And who, you know, and I couldn't do, my life was a spectator sport, and I was the one watching it. You know, it's like I had this little kind of side committee up here that watched and evaluated everything as it went on. And if I'm talking to you guys, are you guys looking? Do we look like we're having fun? Do you wish you were my friend? You know, I mean, just, it's, and I lived in constant fear of doing or saying something stupid that you would then tell your friends about, and they would tell their friends, and they would tell their friend, you know, like that old Brett commercial where it just keeps splitting it, and she told her friends, and she told her friends, and she told her friends, and then, you know, I can't ever go there again because, you know, you'll all laugh, and, you know, I mean, if you understand that kind of thinking, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, it was, it was tired. It was very busy in my brain. I mean, there just was always a constant dialogue. Not even a dialogue, it was a whole committee. And so I never, you know, my favorite promise in the big book is the one that says we can be alone at perfect peace and ease, because I absolutely could not. Even as a kid, you know, if I was alone for a few minutes, everybody would convene and start telling me things like, you know, nobody really likes you. They, you know, they just play with you because their moms make them. And they're all laughing about when you fell down playing kickball 3 years ago. And, you know, I mean, just on and on. I couldn't be by myself. It was an unfriendly place. And even though I was an only child, we usually lived next to a big family, so I would just kind of go, you know, essentially live at their house as much as I could. And I was on committees. You know, by the time I was in junior high, it was pep club and yearbook and student council and honor society and on and on and on and on, because I had to keep moving. You know, I saw, somebody once said I was dancing as fast as I could, and I knew what she meant, you know, because if I stopped, all of those voices in my head were going to catch up to me. And so I was just busy. Now, the reason I was on Honor Society and all of that had nothing to do with any kind of work ethic in school. I just was one of those kids who, well, if you're a test taker, you know who you are. You know, I mean, there are those of us who can just read something, spit it back, get the A, and move on and not remember a word that we read. And, you know, that made me very successful in treatment. You can ace treatment if you're a test taker. You know, but as far as, and I think maybe it's because I read so much as a kid, you know, I was reading before school, who knows? Because if school had taken actual work, I wouldn't have had those grades. But I did, and, you know, it wasn't until later that I really realized how much, you know, my alcoholism was in motion before I took a drink. My kids were 4 and 6 when I got sober. My son was 6 and my daughter was 4. And my daughter was the one that we just thought, oh my God. I mean, this girl could lie. I was a liar long before I drank, and a thief, just like Jay said. But Sarah, boy, I mean, it was an art form with this kid. You know, at 5 years old, you could say, Sarah, why didn't you put your laundry away? And she'd say, I did. And it'd be sitting on the floor right beside her. And by the time you're done, she's convinced you that she put it away and someone else went and got it and put it back on the floor. And so Chuck and I used to tell people, you know, you might be saving for college, we're saving for treatment. And when she was 11, she wanted to be on a swim team, and a lot of her friends swam, and so we took her to try out, and she didn't have much experience in the water, so the coach told her, well, you know, I think you'll be all right, and you can learn, but you can't keep up with your age group yet, so I want you to practice down in age group. Now, this meant, you know, in swimming, they group them 2 years at a time. So this means at 11 years old, he wants her to practice with 9-year-olds. And and that was okay with her. That would not have been okay with me. I couldn't have gotten in the water. you know, and I'm always a little embarrassed to tell you I was 7 years sober when this happened, and I was kind of having a hard time being the mom of the 11-year-old who's swimming with the 9-year-olds, you know, because I mean, how am I gonna look? And so, you know, she practices down to age group. That's fine with her. She goes to her first swim meet, and these are big USS teams where there's 20, 30 teams there, and they just run heats and post the results. She was 70th out of 72 in her first race, and she went back the next day. I would have been trying to get my parents to relocate, you know. I mean, my swimming career would have been over. And we told her, well, Sarah, you know, you didn't win, but you have this, now you have a baseline time. So in your next race, even if you don't win that race, if you do better, if you beat your time, it's a successful race, you know, even if you don't win. Now, the whole time I'm telling her this, I'm thinking, oh, yeah, right. You know, I mean, just win. Come on, you know, you can do it. Because, I mean, my parents told me that when I swam, and I knew they had to tell me that. It's in the parent self-esteem handbook, you know. But she beat her time, and she was happy. And the rest of that story is that 2 years later, she was a state AA swimmer. You know, she swam all over the Midwest, long course and short course. And I would have missed every bit of it the day they told me to practice with the 9-year-olds. You know, and at 11 years old, she had never had a drink. I'd never had a drink when I was 11. But we couldn't have been more different in the way we reacted to things. And what I believe now with her is she doesn't even really react to life. She just lives it. You know, she just kind of does what's in front of her, and I am a ping pong, I mean, I'm like the pinball. You know, I go this way till I hit something, and then I go this way, and I react over here, and I react over there. But it was really clear to me that we were very, very different, you know, without alcohol involved. And she had somehow heard and internalized and put to use that ethic that says, set a goal, work for the goal, achieve the goal. You know, who does that? My outlook on life was always just give me the goal, you know? I mean, I used to say I was a 50-yard dash girl on a 5-mile world, you know? I mean, great starter, not so good for the long haul. But really, I mean, really, if I had to be brutally honest, if I could just set up a lawn chair at the start line and talk you into bringing me the trophy, I would not even do the 50 yards, you know? I am just lazy. So, you know, here's Sarah all of a sudden, the one that we knew was going to be in AA, and she starts doing this set the goal, achieve the goal stuff, and now we don't know what to do with her, you know. So we're kind of watching with interest to see what develops, and by the time she was 14, Chuck and I told her, you know, there's supposed to be one mature person in the house, we think it might be you. And she just kind of went on that way. By the time she was 18 years old, she had gone through, you know, 12 years of school in 12 years. She didn't have to change schools. I mean, my first geographic cure was from private school to public school after 6th grade, because I thought if you'd gone to school with the same 26 people, you would hate them all too, you know. And I mean, because they knew every stupid thing I'd ever done dating back to kindergarten. I had to get out of there. And you know, she went through the same school system. She had the same friends. She decided after her freshman year in high school that she wanted to join the military when she graduated. And then she graduated and she joined the military. She served, I think she was deployed last time I was here, but she's actually just finished up 10 years in the Army last fall and made the decision, made the decision not to re-enlist after 10 years because she was on her 3rd deployment with a child under 6. And but, you know, so she served for 10 years. She got married, then they had a baby like a year later. I mean, it just goes on. We're still not real sure what to do with her. We just, you know, we just watch her and try to learn something. And our son, on the other hand, is a bit more of a kindred spirit. So, you know, but I've always been kind of a people watcher, and watching that just really brought home to me how different my thinking is from, I just assume everybody thinks like I do, you know, and then I get in here and it's easy to assume because we do. But so I went through school and I finally drank toward the end of my freshman year because I did, you know, growing up in a small town, we had a lot of drug education, and all of that, because they knew the college students would be a bad influence on us, which always made me laugh, because I don't know where they thought the college students got the drugs from. You know, we were the ones who lived there, but we didn't tell them that at the school. And but you know, I finally drank at the end of my freshman year, and I didn't get knee walking drunk the first time. Some friends of mine had been experimenting with alcohol, and they were falling down, throwing up. I'm sure you've already figured out by now I do not like to look bad. So I just went out and kind of took it slow and got that warm glow, and took my best friend out the next night to drink with me so I'd have somebody to drink with. And our friendship didn't make it another year because we drank different from the start, you know, from the start. I mean, I don't remember making a conscious decision saying I am now going to do this every chance I get forever, but that's what I did. And I could drink a lot. I had a big capacity for alcohol, so I drank with the big boys because I could, you know, I didn't have to drink with the girls. And in high school, girls drinking is just kind of ugly sometimes. You know, it's like they giggle when they fall down and they throw up. It's so embarrassing, you know. I mean, they wear pink in public. It just is, you know, and everybody likes the same boy, and that gets ugly. And of course, trying to drink with women later, and then there's husbands involved, and that's very confusing. And so I just drank with the guys because I could. And when I got to AA and they said hang out with women, I was horrified. You know, I was like, hang out with women on purpose? You know, I mean, like, really? I mean, I was bad enough I can't drink, and now you want me to hang out with women too? But, you know, and of course now I say, hang out with the women, honey. But, you know, I loved to drink. I loved to drink. God, I just loved to drink. Anything, you name it. You know, my day went better. I never have big issues with morning drinking because if you can, why wouldn't you? I don't know about you, but my day just went better if I could start with a drink. And I eventually, you know, I graduated high school. I went to college. I flunked out of college, you know, with top test scores, like 98th percentile entrance exam scores. Flunked out the first semester because I couldn't go to class because I had inadvertently plopped myself into the middle of a 21 state, and I mean geographically in the middle. There wasn't even a state line within 2 hours, and I couldn't drink, and I pretty much barely could leave my dorm room because I don't know how to have conversations. I can't look you in the eye. I can't talk to you because I am so self-absorbed, so full of fear while I'm not afraid of anything that I don't know what to say after my name's Beth because I know no matter what it is, you're going to judge it. You know, and if I don't have a beer in my hand, my conversation days are done. And I guess college goes better if you go to class. I don't know. But I couldn't, you know, because I remember telling myself, all right, I'm going to go, and I'm going to sit next to somebody, and I'm going to talk to them. Because, you know, the first day of school, kind of, it's a person, 2 chairs, a person, 2 chairs. And I'd be like, I'm going to talk to somebody today. And I'd go, and I'd say, you know, hi, my name's Beth, and she'd say, my name's Jeanette, and you know, I know it's my turn to talk. She's staring at me, waiting for me to talk. Everybody in my head has convened to argue about what we should talk about, you know, and it's like they're all up to say something. You look stupid. Don't talk now. You'll look dumber. You've been staring at her 5 minutes. What are you going to talk about? I don't know. And so it's like they're arguing. I am paralyzed. We have to go. And I can't go back there again, you know, so. And if you understood that, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I was in college very briefly, went back to Oxford, Ohio, got a job in a bank, you know, because I figured I'd disgrace my parents dropping out of school. So I went to work in a bank. They worked Monday mornings, so that was a short career. And I found somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody in Florida, and that's all I needed. I'd been wanting to run away from home since I was 12 years old. And I made a run for it, you know, we took off, didn't look back, didn't tell anybody we were going. I got down there, I got a job in a convenience store because I'd worked in one in Ohio. And, you know, I didn't know down there it was so, I moved to Bonita Springs in 1978. I mean, 3 traffic lights and a dog track. That was pretty much the whole town. But you know, so I didn't know if you went to work 3 days in a row, you were management material. You know, I just thought they really liked me. And, So when I called my mom 2 weeks later to tell her where I was, I said, but don't worry, I'm assistant manager at this store, you know. And she said, she asked a dumb question, I thought. She asked me why I didn't just tell her I was leaving, and I thought, you know, you don't usually do that when you're running away from home. Last time I checked, it's not in the run away from home list of things to do. And there's just a silence on the other end of the phone that you get, you know, when you tell somebody the truth. And she said, Beth, you know, you could have just moved, you're 19. And I just was like, what? I mean, what? So yeah, 19-year-old runaway, that's me. And so I'm down there, now I'm with my people because this whole town was 3 miles long and people bought beer on this end of town to drink on the way to the bar 3 miles away on this end of town. Those are my people. And by the end of 8 months, I had nowhere left to work. I had no, you know, there's only 3 bars in town, and, you know, so the dating pool was a little slim. And I was looking at having to move back to Ohio because I was out of places to live, I was out of places to work, and I thought, you know, I'm gonna have to move back. And that would have been violating one of my biggest rules that I live by, which is don't ever, 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 ever tell anyone that you have made a mistake, you know? I mean, ride that Titanic to the bottom of the ocean. And I just, you know, so as luck would have it, a guy moved into town from California. I had a friend who, in Cincinnati, who said once that they should put a sign at the state line of Florida, Texas, California, Arizona that says, this state doesn't work either. And if you saw somebody pull up to it, read it, just slump and turn around and leave, that's the alcoholic. And, you know, but I missed the sign on my way in. I knew Florida was going to work, and I guess he missed the sign. So we, you know, well, he ended up being my husband, but it really, I said for a long time there never should have been a second date. And I realized there wasn't a second date. It was one of those one-night stands that just kind of dragged on and on and on and on, and 5 years. I wasn't going to admit I made a mistake, and apparently neither was he. So that was the practice husband. And but you know, and in Florida, you know, we ended up getting married. We moved to California, 8 months, moved back to Bonita Springs, moved to the Keys. You know, we had our son. And we moved to the Keys the same way I did everything, you know. We went down for 4th of July weekend. We liked it. We came home on Tuesday and moved on Friday with a 6-month-old baby and $400. You know, hey, Mom, we moved to the Keys. Don't worry, I'm assistant manager at this restaurant, you know. And she said something to me that she said a lot, which was, how can you do something this stupid and land on your feet? It just made her crazy. You know, she hadn't started going to Al-Anon yet, but she still had this crazy idea that there should be consequences for your actions. I don't know. And it just, she did admit later one of the reasons that made her so mad is because she always got caught when she did that crap. So that made me feel a little better. But I would get into stuff and just skate out of it over and over and over. I was like the guy in the cartoons that's walking down the sidewalk and the safes and the pianos are just crashing behind him. You know, that was me, and I just intuitively knew that I would skate out of it somehow. And I get clipped every now and then, but I just never had consequences like I should have. The only time I ever got suspended from school, it snowed and there was no school, so my record's clean. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that happened to me. And you know, so we're in the Keys. My people are down there too. Now, I am a child of the 70s, and there was much to do. I hear people talk about their drug of choice. You know, if I had to pick one, my drug of choice is yours. And that's my favorite. And, you know, but when I finally came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't struggle with where I belonged because, you know, the way it worked for me is, as my alcoholism progressed, drugs interfered with my drinking, you know, and one by one, I quit doing every drug because it interfered with my drinking. There was a class of drugs that I never did because they just meant that I blacked out at 6 o'clock instead of midnight, you know. There were other ones. I had kind of a I'm not drinking drug that worked for a while, but, you know, there's a lot more prison time involved with that particular one. And And I miss the diet pills every now and then, only because it's the only time in my life that I could drink for days. I was skinny and my house was clean, you know? I never could get all that together at once. But, you know, we spent time in the Keys. My daughter was born, and then I just, you know, I wanted out of the marriage almost before I got in it. I knew it was not a good plan. You know, inventory has revealed that every bad relationship I ever had, there was a point in the first 3 weeks where that still small voice said, you know, run. But you know, I can't listen to that voice, because then I would have, you know, I mean, like this guy that I married had a house, a car, and a job at the time. That was very attractive to me. And if I had said, gee, we might not make it for the long haul, he might have said, then why are you living at my house? And that might have been a little uncomfortable. So, you know, I mean, that's just kind of how I rolled. And I wanted out, and finally, you know, I just kind of whirled until he couldn't stand it and threw me out, which is what I was waiting for, because now it's his fault, which is totally fine with me, as long as it's, you know, it's not my fault. And I called my mom and said, you know, he finally threw me out. Now, I wanted to relocate in Florida, but she was having none of that. And she sent me a plane ticket to Ohio, and I ended up back in Ohio in 1984 with a 3-month-old and a 2-year-old. And by then I had been to AA. In 1983, I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's the first time I ever said that I was an alcoholic. And I went because I got fired from a job that meant a lot to me. I had this fabulous job in the Keys. I was night auditor at a resort just full of alcoholics. And I had, you know, there were 7 bars in this place, and they paid me, and I had the keys to all 7 bars. I mean, really, is there a better job on the planet, you know? All the security guards were bikers. It just was a fabulous place to work. And I showed up drunk one night. Well, I actually showed up at 5 for happy hour, and I was still there when I was supposed to be clocking in at 11, so they fired me. So I went to AA because I kind of intuitively knew I wasn't going to find another job like that where I could drink all night and get paid. And so I went to this meeting, and it was a Tuesday night Key Largo group of Alcoholics Anonymous. They were very nice. You know, they were old. I mean, these people had to be 40, 50 years old. And you know, it was one of those discussion meetings with the chairs all in a circle, and there's nowhere to hide, and everybody related to each other, and so the meeting's over, and they invited me to Perkins with them to eat, and I'm thinking, you know, the committee convenes, and it's like, okay, I'm 24 years old, I have a Harley Davidson parked down the street, it's 9:30 p.m., and I have just been invited to Perkins, you know. Do they have Perkins here? Denny's? Okay, same thing, Denny's. So like, oh God, let the good times roll, you know. But I went to my boss and told him I knew I had a problem, that I was going to AA, you know, because I've been to a meeting now. And crash goes another piano. I got my job back after one meeting, because AA works, it really does. And I went back on Friday night, told them I got my job back, thanked them all, and that was the end of my AA career in the Keys. And so now I'm moving back to Ohio because I have to. And I thought, well, maybe I should try AA, you know, maybe. But I really thought if I just quit drinking with bikers, life would calm down, you know. So my mom lived in this neighborhood that it just kind of stepped out of the pages of an LL Bean catalog, you know. It was like very unlike me. And so I tried drinking at a bar in her neighborhood, and of course, you know, it wasn't any better there. So, in 1984 in Cincinnati, because I moved back to Cincinnati, the young people's AA up there was on fire. Icky Pa had been in Cincinnati in 1983, and they were on fire up there. They had a Monday night young people's meeting that had 200 people. You know, they had a Friday night meeting that was 150 people. And it was enthusiastic, active, structured, sponsored Alcoholics Anonymous. But when I walk into a big room full of people, it splits into 2 groups, all of you and me, you know. And I don't know what to say after my name's Beth when I walk into a meeting any more than I know what to say after my name's Beth anywhere else. And clearly you guys all knew each other, and I didn't, and you all knew what you were talking about, and I'm not going to ask, because my other rule besides don't admit when you're wrong is that it's not all right not to know. You know, don't let on that you don't know what's going on. You know, I was doing fake it till you make it long before I got here. And, I know I gave it a good 2 weeks. I'm sure of it. But I didn't, I probably didn't give anybody my name because why would I? And I got there right before the meeting started, and I bolted out the door right the second the meeting's over, and nobody was remembering my name and greeting me, and I just couldn't understand that, after all that. And I went to the bar because that's where I knew what to do. I was in a new city, and if I got $5, I'm good at the bar. I know who can drink as much as me, who shoots pool as well as me, and who's not throwing up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And that started me on my way. Within a year, my children were removed from my custody because they were in bed and I had nothing to drink. And I wouldn't have told you that I panicked, but, in hindsight, I panicked. I mean, I was pacing the floor. And when I would pass through treatment and somebody else would talk about pacing the floor because they had nothing to drink, I would think, oh, you need to be here, buddy, I mean, just, it's a long way from the head to the heart sometimes. And I did not realize that I was, like, in treatment because I had just done the same thing. And I walked down to the corner bar. There was a bar, like, four doors down from where I lived. And I went for a drink and, of course, stayed for more drinks. And my 3-year-old son woke up, and when he couldn't find me, he came down and walked outside onto the front porch. And he couldn't get back in because it was a step down out the door, so he couldn't reach the handle. And he cried. And then, thank God he just stood there and cried instead of walking off trying to find me. And the neighbors called the police, and the police came and called the bar and asked if I would come home because it didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out where I was, And I was charged with child endangerment, and my mom got that 2 a.m. call that no parent wants to get, come get your grandchildren because your daughter's under arrest. And she came and so at 51 years old, her life got turned upside down, upside down, while I'm still waving my banner of, I'm only hurting me, butt out of my life. This is none of your business, oh, but could you come get the kids at 2 in the morning because I'm going to jail. And she took the kids, and I ended up, this is the first time somebody said treatment or jail, and treatment sounded like a good plan. So I went to treatment, and it ended up being all women and 6 weeks long. That was God's big cosmic joke on me. And because I didn't have any insurance, so I had to go where I could afford. And by then, now, the other thing that happened when I went to that meeting in the Keys is that I called my dad and told him I'd been to a meeting, and within a week, I got a box from him in the mail. And it had a big book and a 12 and 12, each day a new beginning, 1 day at a time, 24 hours a day, a cassette tape of his talk, a few pamphlets. I don't know how long he'd been putting stuff in the box, but one meeting and it was in the mail. And so now I'm in treatment, right? But I already have my own big book, thank you, and I have a tape of my dad's talk if you'd like to hear it. And I've underlined a few things that I found interesting if you want to see what I thought was interesting. And I'm a test taker, so I can read it and spit it back at you. And I was the one that they would come get to talk to women who didn't want to leave their children for 6 weeks. And I could tell them all the right stuff, better 6 weeks now than forever later, because if we're not sober, we cannot be parents. But I had a problem developing rapidly while I was in there. And the big book calls it the double life that we lead. The one that we know is true, and the one we want the world to see. And I don't like to look bad, so this is what you're going to see. But what was going on was that I was realizing that I didn't really want my kids back. I would tell you, of course I want my children back. But I didn't, They were fine at my mom's. They were actually better off at my mom's. At my mother's house, those children got dinner at dinner time. They were sleeping in clean sheets, in clean pajamas. They got a bath before bedtime. She read them a story every single night, They got to daycare on time in clean clothes. I couldn't do any of that, and I hated her for doing it. I was not gracious, and I was not grateful. I looked for ways to make her life miserable and make her pay because I was so unhappy, because I'd always laid everything at her feet. It was always her fault. And, I can pretty much, the alcoholism bankrupts us spiritually, emotionally, and I can just give you one example of the kind of daughter I am with untreated alcoholism. My kids would come over for a weekend every now and then to see me because I didn't get them back when I got out of treatment. I drank again, and my kids would come over and see me for a weekend, and periodically on 4 o'clock Sunday afternoon, I would say, I'm going to try to get an apartment soon so we can live together, knowing that I wasn't. But knowing that they'd get excited and go home and tell Grandma, and she would have to talk them down off the cliff and be the bad guy. you know, and I baited her like that because that's who I am with untreated alcoholism. But I'm not hurting you. Leave me alone, you know, and I went through treatment. I didn't stay sober. My dad died while I was in treatment, and I'm the only child of divorced parents, so I got the insurance money. And I got to drink the way I wanted to drink for the next 2.5 years until the money ran out. And the kids stayed at my mom's, and I was in and out of jail and in and out of treatment. And by the end of 1987, I couldn't even afford my $200 a month apartment. I moved to a friend's attic. I used to say it was an attic apartment, and about 17 years sober, I realized it wasn't an attic apartment, it was an attic. It wasn't an apartment till my bed went up there. And, you know, and my kids would come see me, but really, I mean, the kind of parenting, I never physically beat my children, but my children became invisible around me because I was so preoccupied with alcohol. You know, it was alcoholism, and it ran everything I did and everything I thought. And what my kids heard from me over and over and over and over was, I love you, go away, you know? I love you, go play. No, I don't want to play. I don't want to color. Go pick up your toys. Go do something. You know, I'm busy. And that's what they heard from me, and they just became invisible. Because if you're between me and a drink, you're either invisible or you're mowed down, you know. And I ended up, like I said, I drank the way I wanted to drink, and by the end of 1987, I was out of money, and I said one of those prayers that we say, God, I just can't live like this anymore. Please help me. And I remembered this big book that my dad had sent me all the years before, and I found it. Now, I'd been in this attic since August. It's now, you know, December, January. I hadn't unpacked. It was 2 rooms, and I just had a path to the couch, the TV, and the bed. And but I still had that big book my dad sent me. I'm convinced because he sent a hardcover book. If you're new, get a hardcover. They're just harder to throw away. I don't know what it is, but if he'd sent a paperback, it would have been long gone, you know. And I pulled that book out, and I read Bill's story, because I always started on page 1, you know. I mean, who reads the Roman numerals except the suck-ups in treatment, right? So, and when you go through treatment, they tell you the design for living is in here, you know, the directions are in here. And I would open up to page 1, Bill's story, and it'd say, war fever ran high in a New England town. And I just think, oh, yeah, that's helpful, you know. I mean, my outlook on Bill was he's old and he's dead. Who cares? And but that night I read Bill's story again, and it's the first time that I identified with him. I felt how he felt. I knew what he was talking about, and I slept that night just clutching the big book like a teddy bear. And when I woke up the next morning, I felt better, you know, like it had just been lifted. And if you've ever been through that, you know what I'm talking about. And, you know, I didn't stay sober then, because I did after that what I did all the other times, nothing. You know, what I've come to understand here is there's a difference between surrender and staying surrendered. And when I surrender, you know, I can look back and find 2, 3, 4 times that God removed the obsession to drink. Okay, I'm totally convinced of that. But it did not stay gone because I didn't do anything to stay surrendered. I didn't call anybody the next day. I didn't read anymore. I didn't pray anymore. I didn't go to another meeting. And sometime that day, the next day, who knows, you know, within a few days, I was drinking again because the committee convened and said, oh, you know you're going to drink, just get it over with. And I thought, yeah, you're right, what the heck. But weird things started happening. I drank in the Dewdrop Inn in Norwood, Ohio, which is a garden spot, let me tell you. I'm sure there's one in every town. And I walk in, and the bartender's starting to talk about getting sober, and I shoot pool with some guy that used to hang out at the AA clubhouse. And I mean, I'm in the Dewdrop Inn surrounded by people talking about Alcoholics Anonymous and getting sober again. And I'm thinking, really? You know? And I didn't drink most of early '88, just kind of on and off. I was hanging out with a guy that had a bad back, and so I took his pain pills just in case they worked. They never did a thing for me, but I would take 2 a couple times a week just in case they worked this time. And apparently it was enough to keep the urge to drink down, because when he went out of town and took his pills with him, I got drunk, and I was just stunned. So in June of 1988, I had this sudden brilliant flash that, you know, I'd been gone from Florida for 4 years, and I knew everybody down there was going, God, I wish Beth would come back. And I had an emergency credit card of my mother's, and going to Florida was an emergency that day. And I took off. I ran away from home again at age 29, one-way ticket to Florida, and of course I got down there. There was no homecoming parade. People weren't particularly excited to see me. And at the end of the week, the credit card was tired, and I was tired. And I thought, you know, I want to go back to Ohio with my tail between my legs, and the credit card just couldn't bear the weight of a plane ticket. And I was in the Fort Myers airport. It was Sunday, June 26, 1988. And I didn't, you know, I thought about trying to go to the bar, because if I could get a couple drinks, I could get a plan together. But I didn't have enough money for one drink. I didn't even have $1. And I couldn't bear the thought of being asked to leave the bar, because it would have been obvious I was in there trying to get a drink. And I thought about snatching a purse from a little old lady, you know, because nobody had debit cards back then. Everybody carried cash. And you know, I thought maybe I'll get lucky and she'll have some cash. But I was so hungover. Oh, God, I felt bad. And I knew that I'd pick on the little old lady that still did aerobics twice a week, and she'd run me down, take her purse back. So I did what we do. I called Mommy, and she said, call me later, and hung up, which was not a good sign. And so I pretty much just sat in the airport 2 or 3 hours, and then I called her back. And when I called her, she apparently had called her Al-Anon friends. And she said, I booked you a plane ticket, but you need to know that, you know, I'm not really flying you home. I'm flying the children's mother home, because we're afraid we'll never see you again if we don't. And that's what I got on the plane with. And I got off the plane in Cincinnati, and she picked me up at the airport. It was about midnight. I hadn't had a drink all day. I didn't know that was going to be my sobriety date, you know, or I would have tried to get a drink. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm the kind of dieter that if I'm going to start on Monday, I'm going to eat everything all weekend that I'm never, ever going to get to have again starting Monday. You know, I'm put on 8 pounds getting ready to go on a diet. And that's pretty much how I used to quit drinking, too. Well, one more blowout. Monday will be good. So I didn't know that was my sobriety date. And she picked me up and she dropped me off at the local detox in Cincinnati and said, go in or don't, but you can't come home with me. I've done everything I can do for you, and you have to do it. And so I went in, you know, and the next morning I was pondering my situation and trying to, you know, come up with a plan, because I pretty much wasn't welcome in my attic. My car was impounded. I'd remembered that. I had charges pending. I wasn't sure what they were, except they probably had to do with the car being impounded. And in hindsight, that's probably why going to Florida seemed like such a good idea that day. And, you know, those weren't new things, but what was new is I didn't have an idea about what to do about any of it. I just, you know, there really was nowhere left to borrow money. There was nowhere left to, you know, when you're a neighborhood barmaid, every neighborhood has its own barmaids. You know, same old dating pool thing, because I don't know about you, but I did most of my dating at last call. So it's just more convenient that way. You know, if they're still at your house 2 days later, congratulations, it's a relationship. And so I just had this passing thought, because what I realized was I was laying in detox. I was 29 and a half years old. And I realized I never thought I'd live to be 30. I didn't have a single plan on how to be 30 or what to do, because I knew I'd be dead. You know, I mean, I drove drunk for years. I mixed drugs and alcohol. I rode motorcycles drunk. I bartended in places where people shot at each other. I mean, I just should have been dead over and over and over. And here I was, 29 and a half, laying in a detox bed, just distressingly healthy. And, you know, it's like this voice came down and just said, people like you don't die, Beth. And I just thought, oh, God, I'm screwed. You know what I mean? It's like if they had told me, Beth, if you walk out here and get a beer, you'll be dead in 6 months, make no mistake, I would have gotten the beer. You know, I never attempted suicide because I knew I would live. I knew I would live, probably be maimed, and look bad, you know, and so suicide never was an option. But if God had just taken me out, that would have been fine with me. And I realized that day I was going to live 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 more years, whether I drank or not, and that no matter how bad it was going to get worse if I kept drinking. You know, we've got a friend in Greensboro who says grace is that moment when you see everything exactly the way it is. And that's what happened to me that day. I knew it could get worse. And I just kind of had this passing thought that, you know, whatever those people in AA are doing seems to be working for them. And clearly what you're doing is not working for you. You know, maybe you ought to just go do what they do. And I didn't know that was the big surrender, I mean, I always thought I'd go down in flames. I was a biker, for God's sakes, but I mean, my big life-rattling, changing surrender was just, the committee throwing in the towel and saying, oh, screw it. I mean, that was it. And I almost didn't go to AA the day I got out of detox because I've been going all week. I could take a day off, But one person in my head said, you skipped meetings before and you drank. Maybe you ought to just go. So I got on the bus and I went because I had made arrangements. I got out of detox on Friday, a 4th of July weekend, and nothing was open till Tuesday. Friday was July 1st. So, it was like I couldn't get my car back until Tuesday. I had made arrangements to go into a hotel for women, another sign of surrender. I couldn't get in there until Tuesday. I couldn't do anything until Tuesday. My life was on hold. And I knew if I went where I lived, I would drink. I knew that. And I managed to scrape up a little bit of money and get a dumpy hotel. I use the term hotel loosely, but I got just a hotel room that was right on the bus line on Reading Road, Drake Motel. And so that I just had to walk out the door, get on the bus, ride it straight down Reading Road, and walk a block to the AA clubhouse. Because if I'd have had to do a bus transfer, it would have been too much. But so I got on the bus and I went down there, and the woman talking that night told a whole room full of people that alcoholism, not drinking, alcoholism, had taken her to a space where she didn't want to take care of her daughter, she just wanted to drink. And that was my biggest secret. That was the one I couldn't tell anybody, was that, I didn't want my kids, because, I mean, talk about looking bad, And she's telling a room full of people. And so I got her phone number after the meeting. And the next morning I went to call her, and it just, it took half an hour because everybody's, she's going to say Beth who. She didn't really want you to call. She's just being nice, But one voice said, you didn't call people before and you drank. So I called her and I said, this is Beth. I got your number last night. I don't have a clue what to say to you. Breaking rule number 1, admit that you don't know. But I said, I don't know what to say to you. But I know I have to use the phone, so I'm practicing. And she just laughed and said, that's what I had to do too. And that's what I tell people now, just practice. Tell me you're practicing. We don't have to have deep philosophical conversations, I mean, our big thing right now is, did you see Duck Dynasty last night? You know what I mean? It's like, I'm just not very deep, I guess. But call me, use the phone. I don't know what to say either. And so I called her, and she ended up becoming my sponsor. I started going to a noon big book meeting because I knew that you should read your big book every day. My many trips through treatment taught me that. And I started going to this big book meeting that was at noon, that was cleverly named Noon Big Book. And what they did is they read a whole chapter every day. They read the preface and the forewords one day, they read the doctor's opinion the next day, and then a whole chapter a day. And so it was every 13 days, I was hearing the first 164 pages. And I didn't even really realize what was going on at the time, but in hindsight, because I've been to some of the study meetings too, where they, read 3 sentences and talk for an hour, and those are good, what I mean? They both have their place, but when I was in that meeting in North Carolina, I realized that it took us a year and a half to get to page 164, and as a new person, they would have lost me long ago. But I was hearing it every 13 days, over and over. I'm hearing the chapter. They didn't read how it works and the traditions and everything at the beginning because we read a whole chapter, so there was still time for discussion. And it was full of laughter, I mean, I went to that meeting so I wouldn't have to read the book at home. I went because it's at noon, and so my day's free after 1 o'clock. Because really I couldn't read at home anyway. My brain was just mush. And if I tried to read at home, either I was staring at the same paragraph for half an hour, or I was 40 pages in and had no idea what I read. And even in the meeting, I would be, kind of reading along, and it'd be like, whatever the situation, we usually have to do something about it. If we are sure, I wonder what it's going to cost to get my car out of impound later. I better call that guy after the meeting, And I mean, I would just drift right off the edge of the page. You could hear me hit the ground. But then somebody turned a page and I'd be back. And I don't know about you, but, not liking to look bad, of course, we sat kind of in a circle there. And so I could count and see which paragraph was going to be mine, right? To be sure I have all the words and know where to emphasize things. Because, I mean, some of them, the possibilities are endless. You know what I mean? It's like, especially how it works. My God, it's like, rarely have we seen a person fail, Rarely have we seen a person fail, Rarely have we seen a person fail. I mean, it takes work. So I'll be all ready, and I've counted, and I know, and I'm sure I know all the words, and I am ready. I am going to be the best reader you guys have ever heard, you know. And then, like, John reads 2 paragraphs and screws it all up, and I have to start over. But you know what? God took my, like, character defects and put them to good use, because, you know, I went to that meeting for all the wrong reasons. I didn't go there to get sober or learn about the book. But what happened was I heard it when you read it, when I didn't hear it when I read it, you know. And my day was free at 1 o'clock, but by 4 o'clock, I'd remember I had no life, so I went to 2 meetings a day a lot, you know. And the biggest joke on me was that people who read the big book and do what it says tend to be the ones who are in big book meetings. And so I had just unconsciously plopped myself into the middle of the most active people in Cincinnati AA. And there was a lot of laughter in that meeting, and I needed to laugh, you know, and there was laughter there because it was healthy. And people could laugh at themselves, and they would apply the book to their lives as it was going on currently, not just to their drinking. And I just got swept into the middle of those people. They had me answering phones at intergroup. By the time I was 3 weeks sober, somebody said, "Beth, you've been around before, why don't you write an inventory?" And I didn't know I could plead that I wasn't ready. You know, I followed the directions in the book. I wrote the inventory. That woman who didn't want to take care of her daughter either became my first sponsor. She heard my 5th step. By the time I was 4 weeks sober, I'd done a 4th and 5th step, and my life absolutely took off, you know. I am not one of those people who got it gone 2 months or 4 months or 6 months or 2 years without writing that inventory, because it was too noisy in my head, and I had to get it out there in the daylight and look at it and move on, you know. I will be forever grateful to those people, because they believe what it says. When it says, if you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, you are ready to take certain steps. Period. That's how you know when you're ready to take the steps. And, you know, I got involved, I got in the middle, and I just stayed there. My biggest fear when I got sober was that I would never be able to love my children or even know how. They were still at my mom's, you know, they'd been with her for 3 years by the time I got sober, but I started bringing them around on the weekends, you know, and they, like I said, they had become invisible around me. But you guys taught me how to talk to them. And their gaze came up off the floor, and they started looking the world in the eye, because you guys would play with them, and you called them by name, and you asked them to go get coffee cups with you, and you knew that Robbie played soccer, and you cut out paper dolls with Sarah, and they knew that AA was a safe place, you know, and you sat down on the chair when you talked to them, so they didn't have to talk to everybody like this. And I watched that, and that's how I learned to talk to them. And we started attending AA events and picnics, and you know, when I was about a year sober, we went to a picnic, and when I got there, I said, you guys can go play if you want, and I always said that. They never went and played. But that day, about half an hour later, my son tugged on my leg, and he said, Mom, I just wanted you to know, if you need us, that we're over here playing. And it was that moment of grace again, because I realized that they knew they could let me out of their sight, and I'd be there when they got back. And that took a year for that to happen, you know? And by the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I had a little efficiency apartment. When I was a year sober, my mom and I talked and determined that it wasn't in their best interest to come live with me, because at a year sober, they were still with her. They were in a blue ribbon school district in a clean, safe neighborhood, and I was in a 10th floor efficiency apartment in the middle of Cincinnati Public in a crappy neighborhood. You know, it just didn't make sense to drag them down to where I was when they had done what they were supposed to do all along. I was the disruption. You know, and it was time for me to start thinking about somebody else. And so we decided that I would go back to school and get into a place where I could live in a better neighborhood with them, you know, essentially catch up to them. But they spent a lot of time with me, and, you know, like by the time I was 15 months sober, I had a driver's license, a car, and insurance all at the same time. All in the same name. And so that Thanksgiving rolled around when I was about a year and a half sober, and by now I'm thinking, you know, I'm starting to worry about my son a little, because he's 7.5, almost 8, and there's an awful lot of women in his life, you know. I mean, there's just, you know, me and Mom and his sister, and a little guy like that, he needs a man in his life, and, you know, for his sake, really, I should probably start looking around. And so meanwhile, we went to 405 Oak Street, for Thanksgiving Day, and they always did a big food layout at 1 o'clock. I went to noon big book first because that's what I do. And when I came out at 1 o'clock, I couldn't find Robbie, and somebody said, oh, they're all across the street. There's a schoolyard across the street. And I looked over there, and there's my son Robbie, who's 7, and another little boy, and 4 of the guys from Oak Street who were young back then. God, you guys were young. But anyway, they're playing football. And I thought, where else should a little boy be on Thanksgiving Day except playing football, But the grace in that was realizing that I didn't do anything to make it happen except go to my noon meeting. You know what I mean? And it just hit me that if I did what I needed to do, that Robbie's needs would get met too. So I called off the manhunt. And, and a lot of those guys are still sober, Actually, one of them is here today. John, right there, second row, is one of the guys that was playing football with my son in 1989, and we're all still here. So I called off the manhunt for a while, and, about a month later, I was at a meeting, and is that right? Well, anyway, somewhere in there. I had heard this guy talk when I was about a year and a half sober. He was coming up on a year, and I'd never seen him before. They had this thing in Cincinnati called All Group Gratitude Night on Monday, where different groups from around the city would come in and chair the meeting, and one of their members would speak. And I was, I had been a bar drinker, and so I loved the clubhouse scene where you'd know everybody, and suburban discussion meetings just made me kind of itchy, they were too quiet for me. I'm too ADD for like 8 people sitting around calmly. And so it was a suburban night, and I thought, great, but I was already there, so I stayed. And this guy gets up to talk that I'd never seen before, so how sober could he be, right? And and he proceeded to give this really great talk. He had just celebrated a year, and he gave a great talk. I'd never seen him before, but I tell him, that after that talk, I just said, I want what he has, and I'm willing to go to any lengths to get it. And but we actually, he's here, by the way. We didn't start dating for another year, but he started coming around Oak Street, and we ran in real different circles, but we just kept crossing paths. And about a year later, we started to hang out. We didn't even say the dating word for a while because we didn't want to jinx anything. And we made a decision that we were going to get to know each other with our clothes on, which was, like I said, I did all my dating at last call, so this was new and exciting, but we got to know each other, and we fell in like, and we fell in love, and we started dating in December of '90. We got married in July of '92. So we courted, and then we did move in together before we got married, but we already had a wedding date set, and the kids started to spend more and more time with us, and Chuck was in school, and I was in school. And we ended up, we found a house in their neighborhood in 1993. So I was 5 years sober when the kids officially came back to live with me, custody signed over, because the last piece my mom was waiting for was one of us to have a job with health insurance so that we could take care of them if they were sick. And, the kids started 5th and 7th grade walking out the front door of mom and dad's house like all of their friends, and that was, the book says, great events will come to pass. And that was a great event that came to pass. And we went to our home group and handed out candy. It's a boy, it's a girl, And people thought we'd only been married a year, so people were like, are you having kids? And we're like, yeah, they're 9 and 11, isn't it awesome, And, we have both stayed in the middle from then to now. We have been sponsored. We're still sponsored. We're still active. I sponsor women. He sponsors men, and we don't sponsor each other, and we've just been blessed that for whatever reason, because, we have friends that have gotten married, and then one of them started staying home, and every now and then we look at each other and just say, thank you for still going to meetings. And we moved to North Carolina at the end of 2002. A job offer kind of fell out of the sky, and so we've been down there now. We used to tease the kids that when they graduated from high school, we were going to move and not leave the forwarding address. And our daughter graduated from high school in 2002 and went to boot camp, So she went to basic in October, and I got this job offer like 8 weeks later. It just fell out of the sky, and a week later, I'm at a desk in North Carolina. So I called her, and I'm like, hey, we moved to North Carolina, and she's like, no, really? And I'm like, no, really, we did. And she got mad, and I was like, hey, at least we gave you the address, So fast forward many years, and the entire family is in North Carolina, Robbie moved to North Carolina after he got out of the Army in 2005, and then my mom moved to Raleigh, and you know, she and I had a long, rocky relationship. Many, many years of just slow improvement, you know. For a lot of years, if I said I loved my mother, it was with a sense of duty. And probably maybe 17 years sober is the first time that I said I loved her and felt love and not duty. So it's, you know, if you're 4 or 5 years sober and you're still having mom issues, welcome to the club. But it, you know, it slowly gets better. And when our daughter got her last orders to Afghanistan, that's when she decided not to re-enlist. And when she deployed to Afghanistan, we went down to Texas and moved our son-in-law and granddaughter to North Carolina. And when she got out, she came to North Carolina. So the whole family now is, you know, and our house is where they gather. We have a home that they want to come to. We have a home that they want to hang out in. Our son was dating a girl a couple years ago, and her family was nuts. And so he would come, you know, he'd come out to our house, and we just looked at him one day and said, "Did you ever think you'd be coming to our house for like the calm parents?" And he goes, "I know, right? I mean, who knew?" But, you know, anything can happen in Alcoholics Anonymous. And, you know, as a result of everything here, you know, my relationship with God started here, grew here. I'd always believed in God, but I didn't really trust him to take care of my stuff. You know, but the big book says that a spiritual experience or spiritual awakening is becoming aware of the presence of God. And so step 12 tells me I'm going to become aware of the presence of God as the result of these steps. You know, I don't have to find God in step 3. If I could do that, I would only need 3 steps, not 12. You know, so somewhere between 3 and 12, this relationship with God formed, and it has grown and deepened like all relationships do. And I count on that now. It's just part of my, you know, it's part of my fabric today. And as a result of being here and staying here, I've not only become a wife, but I've become an employee, and I've become a grandmother. You know, I know you're probably saying, "Oh, you're way too young for that," but you know, I'm a grandmother. I'm a citizen. I vote. I'm a responsible pet owner. You know, I'm an employee. And I can do all of that because I learned here to do what I said I would do and be where I said I would be. And if you're new, I really hope you come back. And for those of you who are still going to be here tomorrow morning, you're really in for a treat when you hear Chuck talk. And thanks so much for inviting me back.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs, long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.